Creepypastas go as far back as the 1990s and originally began as chainmail. You know, the classic, forward this to 10 people or your dad will leave you, or something like that. Though they started taking off when the internet became more mainstream, with the term even coming from copypasta. Get it? Copy pasta, copy and paste. Being born in 2002, I and many of my middle school friends were fascinated over the scary concepts of Squidward's suicide, the Russian sleep experiment, Mario, and many more. So I thought it would be a nice idea to compile every single original creepypasta story and read them all to you guys. Again, this is part 2. So if you think I missed any, they're probably in part 1. Part 1 did really good with about 75,000 likes, so if this video could reach 100,000 likes, that would be really cool. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Yes, it is still Tuv, just with a different profile picture. I told you guys in the last video I was going to change the profile picture. So if you don't recognize me, well, I hope you start recognizing me more now. I knew fan art was going to be crazy with this new logo, and there will be a slideshow dedicated just to fan art at the end of the video. But yeah, here we are, volume 2 of creepypastas. I didn't know the first one was gonna do so good, so shout out to you guys for liking my reading voice, or I guess my voice in general. I do want to give full credit to creepypasta.com, as that is where I read directly from, and I do want to give credit to you guys because I went out of my way to ask you guys which stories you wanted me to read, and a lot of these are just from you guys. I am extremely open to doing a volume 3. I love this series already. It's very nostalgic to me, and I hope it's nostalgic to you guys too. My goal for this series is to bring one, OG fans of creepypasta some happiness, I guess, from re-listening to these stories, and also showing the newcomers what we used to be hype about. And just like in the last video, I will be popping in after each story to give my opinion on them. And unlike the last video, my eye is working. So yeah, without further ado, let's head on to our first story. Ronald McDonald House. I'm sure you've heard of the Ronald McDonald House charity. They provide housing for families of sick kids when they're in the hospital. Seems pretty innocent, right? Well, there's another side to the charity. There's another type of Ronald McDonald House, one that not many people know about. There's one in most big cities. You won't find it by looking for it. It doesn't have an address. It doesn't even have a sign above the door or even windows. No. The only way you'll find it is if you're taken there. That's how I found out. I have never met my real parents. I've been in and out of foster families and group homes here in Detroit since I was a kid. I'm 15 now, and I'm what they refer to as a bad kid. I'm always causing trouble, always getting thrown out and placed with another unsuspecting do-gooder who thinks they can help me, and I always prove them wrong. My caseworker sat across the black metal table, looking wary and frazzled. On the table between us was a thick letter-sized brown envelope, my case file. Well, your reputation has preceded you, she said, and now you only have 2 options: military school in Lansing or the Ronald McDonald House, which has miraculously cleared you for acceptance. I don't have the patience for drill sergeants at 5 a.m. and how bad could a halfway house named after a fast food clown possibly be? Ronald McDonald House it was. Dark clouds loomed above me the day I climbed into the back of my caseworker's town car, my few belongings in a backpack and the clothes on my back. That's all I could take. One of the few belongings I had was a photo album filled with pictures of all the foster families I had been with. It was nice to remember some of them, even though I had royally fucked it up each time. I've had a few cases who went through the Ronald McDonald House, the caseworker said from the front seat. Things went so well for those kids. I never had to transfer them anywhere else. In fact, the house took over their case files and everything. We drove into downtown Detroit, past all the familiar landmarks. I had been thrown out of one foster home just outside town because I snuck into downtown Detroit with some neighbor kids to sneak into a dive bar. Good times. Well, here we are. The car came to a stop. I looked out the window. We had parked in front of a tall, gray, windowless building, sandwiched between 2 other industrial buildings on a narrow city street. I noticed there was an address on the building to my left and one on the right, but none on this particular building. Not even a sign. Are you sure? I asked, hesitating as I opened the car door and climbed out of the back seat. I slung my backpack over my shoulder, clinging tightly to the strap, and followed the caseworker up to the windowless metal doors. She pressed the buzzer and spoke to someone inside, and the doors clicked to unlock. We walked in. As soon as the metal doors closed behind us, I noticed the pin drop silence. It was that sort of silence that's so oppressive and empty it almost deafens you. Across the dimly lit lobby, there was a glass window with someone inside. A secretary. She was turned away, typing something intently. We walked over to the window. The caseworker rang a bell on the counter, and the secretary spun around in her chair. Her face was painted like a clown, like Ronald McDonald. She even had the short, curly red hair. Otherwise, she wore a typical white nurse's dress. I wanted to laugh at how bizarre it was, but I couldn't. A chill swept down my spine. Something wasn't right. I watched as the nurse and my caseworker interacted. Paperwork was passed through the window. The caseworker slid my case file under the glass. As the nurse nurse slid her some papers to sign. As my caseworker signed the papers, the nurse looked at me. Her smile should have been warm and welcoming, but all I saw in her eyes was hunger. I can't stay here, I stammered loudly. Take me to the military school in Lansing, please. What's the matter, sweetie? The nurse asked, her voice muffled slightly behind the glass. Afraid of clowns? I looked into her hungry eyes. Now there was a malicious glint as she laughed. My caseworker laughed too and said, Now, don't overreact. You'd hate the military school. Besides, this will be good for you. Yes, said the clown nurse. This will be good for you. Before I could object, I heard a slam behind me. I spun around to see an open door in the far corner of the lobby. To the left of the front desk window, there was no one there, just a light that flooded in from the door. Then the creeping shadows, shrill echoing laughter and growing shadows along the wall inside the door. Oh, said the caseworker, here comes the welcome committee. As I stared in horror, clutching the strap of my backpack, my caseworker patted me on the shoulder for the last time. Don't worry, honey, it'll be different this time. You'll feel right at home here, I promise. She turned to leave. I felt bile churning in my stomach. No, I said desperately. You can't leave me here. Oh no, I've got to get going. I never did like clowns. And with that, she left me there. The metal door slammed behind her and I was alone. I faced the open doorway by the front desk again. The shadows had almost entered the room and the piercing laughter was filling the lobby with sound. I ran for the front doors, pounded and yanked and pushed and screamed. Screamed for help, screamed for my caseworker, screamed for anyone. Please, God. I turned to see the nurse behind the glass smiling at me again. And then they entered, laughing all the while. A whole group of laughing nurses with clown faces and red hair. Some male, some female, but all with the same terrifying Ronald McDonald makeup. And in the dim light of the lobby, I could see the glint of metal tools in their hands. Coming up the rear was a pair of clown nurses rolling a metal table, complete with restraints. Get the fuck away from me, I screamed. I pounded at the metal doors again. Let me out of here. They surrounded me, grabbing me as I thrashed and screamed and tried to tear myself away, laughing as I kicked and squirmed. They slammed me onto the rolling table and strapped me down. I looked around wildly. I was surrounded. Let me go! I screamed, twisting and turning and pulling at the restraints. They rolled me through the open doorway and down a seemingly endless white hallway. They laughed and laughed and laughed. They waved their shiny scalpels and razors and needles mere inches from my face, just to make me flinch and scream. This made them laugh even harder. The last thing I remember before one of them finally injected me was the hands. Gloved fingers prodding inside my mouth and pulling at the sides of my mouth, distorting my screams and forcing an unnatural grin onto my tear-streaked, sweaty face. Hot, rancid breath on my face, and the whispered, perverted voice speaking the words, "We love to see you smile." Then, as the maniacal laughter seemed to warp and wind down like a dying record player, everything faded to black. I opened my eyes and was blinded by bright lights above, shielding my groggy eyes from the fluorescent bulbs. I turned on my side and looked around. A cell, tall white walls, covered in scratch marks and stains. A small drain in the corner of the floor, my toilet perhaps. A door with no windows, and on the floor by the door, my backpack. And the moment I sat upright, my vision started spinning. Wonder what they drugged me with. I realized I was shivering. I looked down. I wasn't wearing my own clothes anymore. I was wearing a dirty, ripped hospital gown, bright yellow with a pattern of Ronald McDonald heads all over, nothing underneath. I heard faint, muffled sounds from somewhere in the building. It sounded like screams. I tried to stand, but I couldn't keep my balance. My vision was beginning to stabilize, but my body still felt like rubber. I sank to my knees and crawled over to my backpack. Before I got there, I tried to open the door. As expected, it was locked. I slumped onto the floor beside my backpack and unzipped it. All that remained inside was the photo album. They had taken my notebooks and pens and my cell phone. Of course they did. I warily opened the photo album, but instead of the photos that had been in there, photos of myself and my previous foster families, photos where I had attempted to look happy and hopeful even though I knew I wouldn't be there for long. Instead of those photos, they were like crime scene photos. And in each one, I recognized one of my former foster families, brutally murdered and covered in blood. My heart raced and my stomach churned. I began to turn the pages quicker. Each page a new photo, a new family, new carnage. I recognized their faces and the inside of their homes. I had lived with all of these people, and now they were all dead. Came to the last few pages. A photo of a house at night, then a window of that house. Then, inside the house, a dark hallway with light coming from one doorway. Then, a photo of my caseworker brushing her teeth at her bathroom mirror. Then, a photo of her looking at the camera in horror. Then, a photo of the caseworker, naked, covered in her own blood, contorted into an unnatural position in her bathtub. I turned to the last page. Written inside of the back cover of the photo album were 3 words. You never existed. I felt bile rising in my stomach. I threw the book to the ground and crawled over to the hole in the floor and vomited. They were right. Having killed everyone who ever knew me, it was as though I never existed. I heard more faint screaming in the distance. I knew I had to get out. I wiped the vomit off my face with my hospital gown and crawled back over to my backpack. Hopefully they hadn't found my secret weapon. I unzipped the front pocket and reached down into the very bottom, my fingers scraping the fabric. Sure enough, there they were, flush with the seams in the bag, nearly undetectable. The pins I used for picking locks. I told you, I'm a bad kid. I leaned against the door and listened. I could hear footsteps approaching, but just as soon as they had come, they faded into the other direction. I knew I had to work fast. I jiggled the handle with one hand and picked the lock with the other hand. It was surprisingly simple. Holding the handle, I slowly pulled myself to my feet. I could maintain my balance now. I pulled the door open just a crack. A clown nurse darted past. My heart almost stopped. But his footsteps didn't slow down or change and soon faded. He didn't notice me. I poked my head out the door. Seemingly endless white hallways in either direction. The distant screams were louder now, coming from all around. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. I decided to go to the right. Passing doors identical to the door I had been behind, I heard the screams and sobbing coming from behind each one. I stopped for a moment at one door. I heard the crying of a child inside. I jiggled the handle to see if I could let him out. Locked. I kept moving, looking behind me every few seconds just to make sure there were no nurses that had come into the hallway. Then I had passed a set of white double doors. I stopped for a moment. The word "play place" was written in tall, thin letters across the width of both doors. I heard more screaming coming from within, the screams of multiple people, and laughter. The insane, shrill laughter of the clown nurses. I shuddered. I was afraid to find out what sort of torture was happening inside, and I knew I had to keep moving. I saw a door ahead with a stairway symbol. I headed for it. As I opened the door, I glanced behind me and saw two clown nurses emerging for the play place room. Their white nurse outfits were covered in streaks of blood. I quickly shut myself into the stairwell, hoping they hadn't noticed me. The stairwell was dimly lit, with cement walls and rusty railings. I looked behind at the door I just closed. There was a red number 5 on the door, so I must be on the 5th floor. I decided I had to get to ground level. Each footstep echoed as I began to descend the stairs. I couldn't hear the screaming anymore, just a low, deep humming sound, like pipes in the walls. It was a welcome respite. I finally came to the door numbered 1. The staircase seemed to descend a few floors lower, but I stopped here and slowly peeked through the door. More white hallways, no clown nurses to be seen. So far so good. I stepped through the door and walked into the hallway. I noticed I couldn't hear any screaming on this floor, just the buzz of the fluorescent tube lights above. I came to the end of the hallway and another set of double doors. A large red cross, the kind you'd see on a lifeguard stand or a first aid kit, was painted across the width of the doors. I pressed my ear to the door. All I heard was a slow, rhythmic pulse like a machine at work, and faintly, a beeping sound, like you'd hear in a hospital room. I knew I shouldn't open the door. I knew this wasn't the exit. I knew I should keep looking, but I had to see. I turned the handle. It wasn't locked. I peeked inside. It was a cavernous white room. Fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed. I saw wires hanging around, and hanging from the ceiling in rows, kids in hospital gowns like mine, attached to the white wooden crosses affixed to the ceiling, literally crucified. They were silent, their heads drooping forward, their eyes either closed or staring at nothing. Some seemed to twitch a bit, but most were still. Their crosses swung back and forth very slightly, and the hanging wires, they weren't wires. They were intravenous tubes attached to the kids' wrists, tubes sucking out their blood. I almost vomited again right then and there. In the very center of the room, amidst the rows of hanging crosses, I could see where the rhythmic pulsing sound came from. A huge steel cylinder, which seemed to be collecting the blood from all the tangled tubes that dangled from the kids' wrists. I opened my mouth to scream, to cry out in anger. All I could say was, "What the fuck?" That's when the alarms began to sound, loud, piercing, like the police sirens of hell. They must have realized I was missing. I shut the doors and frantically glanced around the hallway to see if anyone was coming. No signs yet. I ran for the stairwell. As soon as I entered the stairwell, I heard laughter from above, echoing and reverberating throughout the stairwell. The clown nurses were coming. I stumbled down the stairs as fast as I could. I must have gone down another 3 stories before I reached the basement. I found myself running through a dark, sewer-like hallway with small light bulbs overhead every 10 yards or so. The smell of decay and rotting flesh grew more and more pungent as I ran. The laughter continued behind me. I managed to glance behind to see a group of them running after me. I saw them come into the light and then become silhouettes again, their smiling faces and gleaming knives and needles pushing my adrenaline to the max. I ran past alcoves full of stacked, rotting corpses, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't think of anything but escape. I turned to a corner and found myself facing the metal rungs of a ladder in the wall. I climbed until my head smacked the ceiling. Below me, the shadows and laughter grew closer. Their footsteps slowed. They were close and they knew it. I pushed at the ceiling above me, heaving upward and panting and screaming. The clowns were below me, laughing and waving their scalpels. Something cut my leg. I screamed and pushed one last time. The ceiling gave way as a manhole cover slammed onto asphalt above, a circular opening. I climbed out and frantically pushed the manhole cover back over the hole, blocking out the laughter of the clown nurses below. I laid there on top of the manhole cover for a few minutes as I caught my breath. Rain fell onto my skin. Turbulent night sky above was a welcome sight. I looked around. Abandoned buildings, broken glass, no lights, no cars, no signs of any life at all. A police siren somewhere in the distance, then silence. I climbed to my feet. Pain shot through my leg. I looked down and saw the cut on my ankle where a clown nurse had slashed me. Bastards. Limping the best I could, I started to walk. "Hello?" I called out. The only answer was a distant roll of thunder. "Somebody, help me, please!" My foot fell on something soft and mushy. I looked down. A newspaper. I peeled it off the wet asphalt. Most of the ink had faded, but I was able to make out the date, July 13th, 1992. I dropped it, an icy dread filling my stomach. I kept walking. "Can anyone hear me?" I screamed. "Please! Anyone, please!" My words faded into delirious sobs. I stood still for a moment. The rain had soaked through my thin hospital hospital gown. I shivered as the wind blew. Then I saw a light in the distance. It was a big yellow M in the sky. McDonald's, of course. I limped towards it. When I came to the McDonald's, I saw that apart from the M, the rest of the building was completely dark. I walked cautiously toward the broken windows and looked in. Darkness. I turned and surveyed the Play Place outdoor playground. 10-foot tall structures of colored tubes for kids to crawl through. Sitting at one of the benches was a familiar figure, the Ronald McDonald statue. You know, the one where you could sit beside him and it looks like he's got your arm around your shoulders. Every kid has seen it. I shuddered at the sight. The doors were unlocked. I walked in, out of the rain. Silence. Darkness. I noticed that the decor wasn't like the modern McDonald's you'd see. It was still the same as it was in the 80s, with the white plastic booths and the red-yellow tiles. The wind seemed to whisper through the broken windows. I noticed something on the front counter, a black rectangle. I got closer. A laptop, a nearly new laptop. I let out a soft, delirious laugh. I knew what I was supposed to do. So I took the laptop outside and sat behind the Ronald McDonald statue. I opened the laptop and began to type this story. The rain falling onto the keys, but I don't care. There's nothing left to do now but wait, because I've been noticing, out of the corner of my eye, Ronald is trying to look over my shoulder. He's laughing now. All I can do is join him. So Ronald McDonald House. I actually kind of liked this one. I just hate like the shock value of like the children being dead. Like it's like, kind of a cop out, I guess. I don't know. There's something about like that will always be creepy. I feel like that will always be creepy. So just putting like dead kids in your story is just like, kind of lame. It's always funny when the stories when they're like, yes, this is true. You've probably heard of the Ronald McDonald House by now. It's like, bro, stop. No, we haven't heard of the fucking Ronald McDonald House. There is something creepy about that statue though. I got a picture with the statue actually. If I find it, I'll put it in this video right now. But I got a picture with that statue, so I'm just saying, like, I'm like the creepypasta king at that point. That one wasn't even funny. Let's just head on. Let's just head on to the next video. Let's head on to the next story. Squidward suicide. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final, yet animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles, such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Bivalve, When SpongeBob and Patrick Adopt a Sea Scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card Squidward Suicide, we didn't think of it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things began to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes, as if the skip never happened. There's slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not the normal cartoon booing that's normal in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing. Very much unlike him. This isn't the oddest thing though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is at this point, there's no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in this silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, or tentacles, over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself for a split second and then goes back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound, and Squidward sobbing. It sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good a sound as a studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce that sound of quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched this show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were of course mortified, but pressed on, hoping that this was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body and frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were that of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches, laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were, but he knew he had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, barrets in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped, naked, except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyperrealism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all is his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing, and this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. It went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor. The animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames with the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out and that deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter spatters the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head, above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then, the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us that got to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware, software, as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, no one does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child was identified and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. Squidward's suicide. If that word is censored, then YouTube didn't like that word, so I had to come back and re-edit. You guys know the Squidward story, the famous Squidward story. This is a classic. Why do you think it's the main image in the thumbnail? I don't think I was naive enough to believe this. I know a ton of people thought it was real back in the day. I'm not trying to be like, I'm different. I knew it was fake, but it's just like, come on, y'all, a kid show where the character's killing himself. It's pretty funny they picked Squidward out of all characters. I guess it makes sense, but it's like, bro's already going through enough. But yeah, it's an OG creepypasta, and my sister of all people knew of this story, so it's probably way more famous than I think it is. Let's head on to the next one. The Russian Sleep Experiment. Widely regarded as one of the most popular and widest spread creepypastas ever written, the Russian Sleep Experiment is notorious as much for the gruesome nature of its content as for its plausibility. To this day, a large portion of the articles written about the story are attempts to investigate its validity or to debunk it as a hoax, something that speaks to not only to the story's effectiveness, but also to the deeper societal anxieties to which the story appeals. For those who don't know, the Russian Sleep Experiment is supposedly a factual account of experimentation acted out on subjects by the Soviet government and military in the wake of World War II. The experiment, meant to explore the effects of sleep deprivation on the human body, was also used to test a new gas that could keep people awake for days at a time. The report documents the degeneration of those experimented upon, individuals commonly referred to within the creepypasta community as the test subjects. The horrifying results of these experiments and the crazed, almost subhuman or demonic creatures it produces are often illustrated alongside the story, with one image in particular being representative of the entire myth. Now let's get on to the story. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before the closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water, and a toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity, with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped, so did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it was impossible that no sound could be coming from the 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice respond, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones to turn the gas back on. The chamber was open and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them were in life. The food rations past day 5 hadn't been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chests stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of the days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber and remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count the ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost instantly. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, and just repeated the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on his wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It only took a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under. In the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had triple the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed. He was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without the anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had been injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but they were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point, all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might. First left, then right, then left again, just as something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering from brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flatlines as the one who just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to his bed as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things, not with you," he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out. "So nearly free." Appearance and origins. Whilst there are a number of images associated with the Russian sleep experiment, and the story is of an event rather than about an individual or character, there is one image that is most well known and commonly linked to the story, and which most fans will instantly recognize. The image shows a humanoid creature staring blankly into a camera. The figure is horribly emaciated, a fact that is further emphasized by the extent to which the eyes are sunken back into the sockets, the brow and the cheekbones protruding to an unnatural extent. The teeth, meanwhile, are of an unusual size and forced forward by the thinnies of the subject into a maniacal-looking grin. The subject features an enlarged head and huddled posture, first with the concept of them being as much a victim as a threat. The image is in black and white, which lends some authenticity considering the period in which it was alleged to be taken. Thankfully, the image is fake, and rather than being a human, is in fact a photograph of a Halloween prop named Spasm, created in 2005 by Morbid Enterprises. There is some disagreement as to where the story first originated. While some sources claim that the tale's first appearance can be linked back to a user known as Orange Soda who posted the story to the CreepyPasta website on August 10th, 2010. Others trace its origins to an August 8th, 2009 post on the RIP747 WordPress blog, pointing out that the story was also posted on the miscellaneous board of bodybuilding forums by a user named Falcon Punch on August 20th, 2009, which would again predate Orange Soda's post on CreepyPasta. It's also worth noting that the post on RIP747 blog claimed that the story had been shared with him by his brother, and whilst this may just be a narrative device intended to distance the author from the piece, it could also be regarded as evidence that the story existed prior to this post. While some believe the British author Ice to have written the original CreepyPasta, based upon the fact that she produced a book of the same name, she has clarified that she was simply inspired by an earlier work and is not the myth's originator. Following Orange Soda's post on CreepyPasta, a page was set up for the story on August 16th, 2010. The story was then picked up and read aloud on the Mr. CreepyPasta channel in November of 2011, after being shared by Griffin23 and receiving favorable reactions on the r/WTF subreddit in October of 2012. The story got a dedicated site, RussianSleepExperiment.com, on March 7th, 2013. The story was read aloud on YouTube over black and white images by I Read Creepypastas in a video uploaded on the 1st of October, 2013. This may be the first time that the narrative was linked to the images so famously associated with it, and in its first year alone, the video garnered over 11 million views. Influences and buried fears. Scholars of folklore who have examined and written about the Russian sleep experiment myth have pointed out how the story's effectiveness and viral spread can be attributed not only to its apparent believability, but more importantly to anxieties within society around issues such as the horrors of war and the atrocities committed during World War II, but also with apprehension about the capabilities of foreign militaries. It has been noted that across the spectrum of creepypasta stories, the majority of stories concerning scientists and nefarious or experimentation are linked to Germany or Soviet Russia. Real-life influences. Whilst many creepypasta stories have clear influences from older folkloric traditions, what makes the Russian sleep experiment story so unsettling and horrifically scientifically plausible is its proximity to the truth. Whilst many words and article inches have been dedicated to debunking this myth, it is simply a fact that similar horrors have indeed been committed by governments on their own people, and that these incidents were undoubtedly influential in the formation of this particular mythology. By suggesting that the events recounted took place in the 1940s, and with the addition of black and white and period photographs, the authors and posters placed these fictional events within the same decade as the real-life atrocities of the Holocaust. Whilst the sleep experiment narrative might seem far-fetched in most contexts, with most readers questioning the ethical and moral validity of such research, they remain within the realm of possibility when one considers that similar and perhaps greater crimes against unwilling subjects were committed in the name of advancement during this period. Though exaggerated to the point of monstrosity, the photograph of the Halloween prop Spasm skirts the line of being plausible when one is reminded of the photographs of the near-starved victims of death camps under the Nazi regime. In a deeply disturbing way, the hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, and blank stares are nakedly reminiscent of real-life footage and images from that time. Furthermore, when one considers the forced experimentation and medical research performed on unwilling subjects, including the disabled by the Nazis, most infamously by Joseph Mengele, who, for example, saw fit to stitch pairs of living twins to one another, it becomes clear why readers have a hard time dismissing the story offhand. The Russian sleep experiment remains one of the most impactful and haunting creepypasta creations, not only because of the effectiveness of its fiction, but because it skirts a little too close to the horrifying truth. The Russian sleep experiment. I think this is my personal favorite from this batch in volume 2. I think it's just the creepiest. I think it's the most believable, even though, yeah, it is not believable, but it's like the most, it makes sense, man. Experiments on people, it makes sense. But yeah, the famous image for the Russian sleep experiment being a Halloween prop is the funniest thing ever. I had no idea about that until I just read about it. So pretty cool. I wanna buy it now. Let's head on to the next one. Dead Bart. You know how Fox has a weird way of counting Simpsons episodes? They refuse to count a couple of them, making the amount of episodes inconsistent. The reason for this is a lost episode from season 1. Finding details about this missing episode is difficult. No one who was working at the show at the time likes to talk about it. From what has been pieced together, the lost episode was written entirely by Matt Groening. During production of the first season, Matt started to act strangely. He was very quiet, seemed nervous and morbid. Mentioning this to anyone who was present results in them getting very angry and forbidding you to ever mention it to Matt. I first heard of it at an event where David Silverman was speaking. Someone in the crowd asked about the episode, and Silverman simply left the stage, ending the presentation hours early. The episode's production number was 7G06. The title was Dead Bart. The episode label 7G06, Moaning Lisa, was made later and given Dead Bart's production code to hide the latter's existence. In addition to getting angry, asking anyone who was on the show about this will cause them to do everything they can to stop you from directly communicating with Matt Groening. At a fan event, I managed to follow him after he spoke to the crowd, and eventually had a chance to talk to him alone as he was leaving the building. He didn't seem upset that I followed him, probably expected a typical encounter with an obsessive fan. When I mentioned the lost episode though, all color drained from his face and he started trembling. When I asked him if he could tell me any details, he sounded like he was on the verge of tears. He grabbed the piece of paper, wrote something on it, and handed it to me. He begged me to never mention this episode again. The piece of paper had a website address on it. I would rather not say what it was for reasons you'll see in a second. I entered the address into my browser, and I came to a site that was completely black, except for a line of yellow text, a download link. I clicked on it, and a file started downloading. Once the file was downloaded, my computer went crazy. It was the worst virus I had ever seen. System restore didn't work. The entire computer had to be rebooted. Before doing this though, I copied the file onto a CD. I tried to open it on my now empty computer, and as I suspected, there was an episode of The Simpsons on it. The episode started off like any other episode, but it had very poor quality animation. If you've seen the original animation for Some Chance at Evening, it was similar, but less stable. The first act was fairly normal, but the way the characters acted was a little off. Homer seemed angrier, Marge seemed depressed, Lisa seemed anxious, Bart seemed to have a genuine anger and hatred for his parents. The episode was about The Simpsons going on a plane trip. Near the end of the first act, the plane was taking off. Bart was fooling around, as you'd expect. However, as the plane was about 50 feet off the ground, Bart broke a window on the plane and was sucked out. At the beginning of the series, Matt had an idea that the animated style of The Simpsons world represented life, and that death turned things more realistic. This was used in this episode. The picture of Bart's corpse was barely recognizable. They took full advantage of it not having to move, and made an almost photorealistic drawing of his dead body. Act 1 ended with a shot of Bart's corpse. When Act 2 started, Homer, Marge, and Lisa were sitting at their table crying. The crying went on and on. It got more pained and sounded more realistic. Better acting than you would think possible. The animation started to decay even more as they cried, and you could hear murmuring in the background. The characters could barely be made out. They were stretching and blurring. They looked like deformed shadows with random bright colors thrown on them. There were faces looking in the window, flashing in and out, so you were never sure what they looked like. This crying went on for all of Act 2. Act 3 opened with a title card saying 1 year had passed. Homer, Marge, and Lisa were skeletally thin and still sitting at the table. There was no sign of Maggie or the pets. They decided to visit Bart's grave. Springfield was completely deserted, and as they walked to the cemetery, the houses became more and more decrepit. They all looked abandoned. When they got to the grave, Bart's body was just lying in front of his tombstone, looking like it did at the end of Act 1. The family started crying again. Eventually, they stopped and just stared at Bart's body. The camera zoomed in on Homer's face. According to summaries, Homer tells a joke at this part, but it isn't audible in the version that I saw. You can't tell what Homer was saying. The view zoomed out as the episode came to a close. Tombstones in the background had the names of every Simpsons guest star on them. Some that no one had heard of in 1989, some that hadn't been on the show yet. All of them had death dates on them. For guests who died since, like Michael Jackson and George Harrison, the dates were when they would die. The credits were completely silent and seemed handwritten. The final image was the Simpsons family on their couch, like in the intros, but all drawn in that hyper-realistic, lifeless style of Bart's corpse. A thought occurred to me after seeing the episode for the first time. You could try to use the tombstones to predict the death of the living Simpsons guest stars, but there's something odd about most of the ones who haven't died yet. All of their deaths are listed as the same date. Dead Bart. I had heard about this one. I never looked into it just because I didn't care. I do like The Simpsons, but as I expected, it's corny as fuck. Some cornball wrote that. But, no offense to the writer. It's just so weird. Like, I followed Matt Groening and then he gave me a piece of paper with this link and it gave me a virus. Like, damn, like, at least make it somewhat believable. Yeah, let's head on to the next one. 1999, written by Camden Lamont. The year is 1999. That sentence brings me back to my senior kindergarten class when I was 5 years old, where we used to read out the date on a black board every single day. The year 1999 exists as a stain in my mind. However, as a memory that will not go away no matter how I try to forget it. 1999 marked the year I lost my first tooth, my first time on a plane, and unfortunately, the early loss of my childhood innocence. That one memory that refuses to be wiped. It all started with that new, or old, TV. At that time, Pokemon was the latest fad to hit the school. Pokemon cards, games, stickers, and the most popular, the TV show. So of course, every time I came home from school, I would stay glued to the TV until Pokemon came on at 5. The only problem was that my dad watched the news at 5:30, and Pokemon episodes were back to back, which meant I had to miss an episode every day, something I whined on and on about. My dad got tired of hearing me complain every day. That must be why he went and bought another TV. Unfortunately, it was just an old, small boob tube with rabbit ears even. It only had 20 channels available, not including the channel Pokemon was on. I recall I didn't care though. I was just thrilled I had my own TV in my room. After surfing through the channels, I came to the conclusion that only channel 2, TVO Kids, was worth watching, so I watched that for a while. It wasn't for another few months that I discovered channel 21. One day in April, I was flipping through the channels, trying to see if Pokemon was on. I pressed channel 21 on the remote, hoping there were more channels, and to my delight, there was. My dad was surprised too, but he let me watch it because it seemed to have kids programs on. The channel was called Caledon Local 21, and I later found out it was indeed broadcasted from the town of Caledon, Ontario, a town very close to my city. The shows I saw on Caledon Local 21 looked poorly made, and I never understood what was going on in them half the time. However, as I grew up, every time I thought of that channel, I realized more and more how messed up the shows were, and I had to ask myself, what the fuck was I watching? The following is a list of shows and episodes I remember seeing on Caledon Local 21. How I remember such detail even disturbs me, but I guess things like this stand out in your mind for a while. The channel only ran a few shows, probably because it was only operational between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. April 1999, Mr. Bear's Cellar, episode 12. Very sketchy name if you were to look at it nowadays. The show featured a guy wearing a bear mascot costume who would get a new visitor into a cellar every day. It was always a kid. The show was filmed with a camcorder, and not a very good one either. The police asked me a lot of questions about this show. This episode started with Mr. Bear sitting at a table playing checkers by himself. He sat there playing for a bit until there was a knock at the door. The camera was then looking up the stairs at the door where there was another knock. Mr. Bear climbed the stairs and opened the door to reveal two young children. One was a boy about my age, the other was a girl who looked about 8. Mr. Bear danced in delight and then started talking to the kids. I couldn't hear any of them that well. I remember Mr. Bear then led the kids to the cellar, which was quite dark, only lit by a small oil lamp on the table. I can't really remember much more, except him singing a song, which I couldn't remember too well either, probably because of that large bear mask. The episode ended with them playing hide and seek, with the kids hiding in a closet and Mr. Bear counting. May 1999. Soup and Spoon. I don't think it was even a show. I think it was more of a special movie thing. All I know is I stopped watching Caledon Local 21 for a while because I thought this show was too stupid, especially since Pokemon now came on at 4:30 and 5. I don't remember much of this, but it showed a can of soup and a spoon both attached to strings, swinging back and forth, as if someone was holding them and dangling them in front of the camera. Interestingly enough, the show was shot in a basement, which looked just like the one used in Mr. Bear's cellar. Like I said, I can't remember much. The only thing I remember clearly was the end. The entire thing was only half an hour, and just included stuff I found stupid, such as the spoon chasing the soup around, trying to eat him. The ending showed a table and about 7 kids sitting around it, each with a bowl of soup in front of them. They were sitting and looking at the camera, but with confused, almost frightened faces. The cameraman then held the can of soup in front of the kids and said, "Spoons ready?" And then it just stopped. July 1999. It was summer and I hadn't watched Channel 21 for a while, until one day when I slept over at my friend's house and decided to check it out again. My friend had gotten a TV in his room for his 6th birthday, so we stayed up very late. For us, 9:30 was late, and watched TV. That's when I remembered Channel 21 and brought it up to my friend. We decided to see if it was on, and to our surprise, it was. They must have changed the broadcasting time. Mr. Bear's Cellar, episode 23. This episode was entertaining for my friend and me, mainly because it had swearing. However, now when I think of this episode, I realize something was definitely wrong when it was filmed. The episode started with the camera on its side while it was facing Mr. Bear, who was walking upstairs to the cellar door. The camera then blacked out for a second, before fading in, back up right, and facing Mr. Bear. There was also another kid talking to him, but this kid looked about 11 or 12. He was talking to Mr. Bear for a while, but I couldn't hear well. Again with the crappy camcorder, until the kid started raising his voice. The kid was saying how it was late and his sister had to go home. You could also hear more voices in the background. I remember Mr. Bear clearly saying, "Get the fuck out, you're not invited," the deep voice muffled by the bear mask. I remember my friend and I looking at each other and laughing at the mention of the forbidden F word, but the episode got weirder. The kid began climbing the stairs before turning around to say how he was gonna call the police. Mr. Bear began breaking into a run towards the kid, who started screaming and running as well. The camera then cut out, and that was the end of the episode. The channel then turned to static shortly after. August 1999. I didn't want to watch Channel 21 after that. In August, I grew more curious to see Mr. Bear's cellar for some reason though. The last episode I saw of Mr. Bear was weird and had swearing, which also made me think the show was meant for teenagers. Nonetheless, I flipped onto Channel 21 when my dad was busy. Mr. Bear's Cellar, episode 28. Apparently this episode had been playing the entire month of August. It was studied a lot by the police. The entire episode was just Mr. Bear sitting in a chair talking to the audience. "Hello kids, do you want to visit my cellar? If you do, please write me a letter at this address." The screen then switched to a white screen with multicolored letters reading the address, and that was what remained for the rest of the episode. This repeated for 5 hours every day until September came. And guess what I actually did? I sent Mr. Bear, or that sick bastard who portrayed him, a letter. I did it out of curiosity mostly. My dad was okay with it because he thought it was a legit kid show, but then again, he never saw any of what was on Channel 21. So I wrote a letter using my best writing possible. I think it just said how I wanted to meet Mr. Bear. So my dad sent the letter to the address Mr. Bear said on the show. It stayed on all day anyway for some reason. It took about a week to get a response, which I was surprised I did. I still have the letter I received on August 15th, 1999. The letter said, "Dear Elliot, thank you ever so much for your letter. I would love to have you in my cellar. We play games, watch movies, and go fire camping in the middle of the woods. Come to my house at," the police cut out this address, "Caledon, Ontario, Canada. I look very forward to having fun with you. Love, Mr. Bear." I cannot believe my dad never found this sketchy, because he actually took me to the house. And then that's when the police became involved. Those endless questions, those pictures of terrified kids, the woods. That brings me to why I'm writing this blog. That psycho and his friends did some fucked up shit back then, and now it seems he's trying to get in contact with me again. The entire police thing is coming back. That has brought 1999 back to me. Over a decade later, it's happening again. Update, November 14th, 2009. People have been emailing me asking what exactly happened in 1999. I will get to that. Those weird TV shows I was watching apparently were meant to attract kids to Mr. Bear's house. What Mr. Bear did shocked the entire town. My dad actually drove me to Caledon along with the address Mr. Bear left on the letter. The house was actually in the outskirts of the town, in the open farmland. I still remember that house. It looked like an older farmhouse that looked to have been built in the early 1900s. The windows were all boarded up, and the house looked in a state of disrepair. As we walked up to the house, I remember my dad checking the address over and over again and looking at the house in disbelief. Then the door opened. I expected Mr. Bear to be at the door, but I was surprised to see a police officer emerge from the creaking doorway. The officer began talking to my dad, while I quickly asked if this was Mr. Bear's house. The officer's face cringed slightly, and he muttered, "Oh God," or something like that. He started talking quietly to my dad so I couldn't hear, although my dad told me to go to the car anyway, and then we just went home. My dad was quiet the whole way home. I felt something strange had happened. My dad never told me what happened for a while. I forgot about it anyway too. Channel 21 no longer came on, and when I asked about it, my dad would not acknowledge its existence. I think it was when I was 13 where I learned the truth. I remember Channel 21 one day and asked my dad about it. I guess he finally decided I should hear the truth. Caledon Local 21 was a local TV channel that ran from October 1997 to August 1999 in the Peel region of Ontario. The entire channel was made from a house in Caledon, the one I visited, and run by a man who was not really known by anyone in the town. The channel was only available to older TVs because the signal was one only picked up by rabbit ears, weaker frequency. The man created all the shows on the channel, all of which were kids shows. He was Mr. Bear, and he was the mysterious cameraman. The real reason he created the channel was more disturbing than what was originally thought. As you might have already guessed, he kidnapped kids and held them in a cellar. But while most people thought he was a serial child molester, he really wanted to use the kids for another purpose. The day I arrived, the man had fled his house the night before, the day before the police went in for their investigation. I wasn't the only one who was watching. Update, December 2nd, 2009. Sorry for not answering any questions for so long. I haven't accessed my email account for some time. Anyway, let me finally set things straight about what I know. Back in October, I visited the house previously owned by the man who ran Caledon Local 21. 2 women lived there, operating a daycare business. How ironic. Now to answer the questions you guys emailed me. Who else watched Caledon Local 21? I know other people that watched it for sure, including those kids who wound up at Mr. Bear's house. After some Google searches, I found a few people on the Neo-Seeker forums who were discussing shows from Caledon Local 21. They talked about the 2 shows I watched, but also another 2 shows I had never seen before. A user named I Am Real Life seemed to know all of the shows that were broadcasted on Channel 21. Here are the 2 I never heard of: The Fallen Angel and Life. I Am Real Life described it as a fairly boring show about a guy rambling on in front of a camera about how we must please Satan and appease him before it's too late. Paint with the Soul. I Am Real Life and another user called Siggy92 were discussing the show. They described it as Blair Witch-like, as it consisted of the cameraman wandering around in a forest at night doing nothing particularly interesting. I'll go looking for the conversation and see if I can get a link. Where is Mr. Bear, or the guy who wore the costume? If I did know, I would have said earlier. I have no idea where this guy is or if he's dead or alive, hopefully dead. When I see my dad's friend next time, I'll ask him this. Maybe I can get a more definite answer. What did Mr. Bear do to the children? This is by far the most common question I've been asked. I found this out in October as well, via my dad's friend who was a retired Caledon regional officer. Apparently, the man playing Mr. Bear took the kids out of the house and into the forest nearby. What he did there, police are not exactly sure how it happened, but 16 charred bodies of children between the ages of 4 to 13 were found in a 15 by 15 foot ditch deep within the forest. My dad's friend didn't want to go into exact details, but I'm seeing him next Thursday anyway, so maybe I can extort more information from him then. That's all I have for now. Thanks for keeping an interest in my blog. I'll try to gather as much information as I can for my next post. I've actually been getting pretty interested in this myself. It should be my right to know what the hell happened. Update, January 14th, 2010. I'm sorry I haven't posted anything for a while. I kind of lost interest in the blog since I hit a standstill while looking for more information about the identity of the owner of Caledon Local 21. However, a few weeks ago, I struck gold. I found some answers surprisingly from the father of a kid I used to babysit. He lives just across from my street, and I used to look after his kids when they were younger. He currently doesn't have a job either. He used to live near the woods outside of Caledon and witness the owner's activities in the woods. His name is Anthony Polo. When he lived in the small bungalow outside the woods, he would often venture in to smoke a joint of marijuana or two before returning to his work as a wood craftsman. Polo described that sometimes he would hear the voices of children coming from deeper in the woods, as well as a glowing light in the distance. Polo told me these events started in late 1997. No, this is around the time Caledon Local 21 began airing. He apparently became annoyed by this happening every once in a while and actually went to investigate. Polo then described what the whole scene looked like when he got there. There was a group of kids, he said about 13 to 17, and ages 5 to 12, gathered around a large pit with a burning fire. With them was a single adult. Polo talked to the man, noting his unusual unkempt appearance of a crack addict, as well as his constant twitching, and asked what he was doing out in the forest with the children. The man said they were on a camping trip, something they did frequently. Polo, not suspecting anything, Caledon has one of the lowest crime rates in Canada, simply left it at that and told them to be quieter. Polo then paused for a while before telling me that they never became quieter. In fact, sometimes he heard loud chanting from the children in an unknown language. He didn't bother meeting with the man again, as he was moving away. I told Polo that the man was probably the owner of Caledon Local 21, but he doubted it, as he heard that the man was moving to Pickering by several other residents near that area. Here's what I now know. The man would take the kids into the woods regularly for quote-unquote camping. The fire pit Polo described may be the hole the bodies of the children were found in. The children Polo saw are probably the ones found dead. The man moved to a city called Pickering, a smaller city east of Toronto. I'll discuss this with my dad's friend, the ex-cop, and see if this matches anything the police knew about the man. I also want to see if he has any other knowledge of what was aired on Caledon Local 21. Update, February 10th, 2010. Good news, guys. I talked to my dad's friend and he disclosed a lot of information for me. First, I asked if the police had any information on the man who ran Caledon Local 21. He replied that they have only had the same leads for years and never found a suspect. However, the Peel Regional Police do have some of the tapes found in the house Caledon Local 21 was broadcasted from. He took me over so I could watch a few. I guess I hadn't said much about him yet. My dad's friend is Mitchell Wilson. Pretty nice guy. He seems to understand my thirst for knowledge on what happened during the late 90s in that house. He feels it was wrong that my dad went so long without telling telling me much. He took me to the Davis Road police station. If you don't know, it's the largest police station in Caledon, and one of the largest within the Peel region itself. Each of the main stations around Peel have some of the tapes. I was able to watch all the footage that the Davis Road station has. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to take any tapes home for obvious reasons. Paint with the Soul, episode 10, Garbage Thrown Away. Paint with the Soul was one of the shows that I Am Real Life and Siggy92 discussed on Neoseeker. I told the police about this, and he informed me that 12 episodes of the show were made and broadcasted between December 5th, 1997 and January 8th, 1998. Exactly as I Am Real Life and Siggy92 described, the episode opened with the cameraman wandering around in a forest. It appeared to be during the evening, as it seemed the sun was setting. The cameraman walked along a path until he got to an area where there was a lot of garbage lying on the leaves. The cameraman looked around at the various wrappers, bottles, bags, and boxes, making sure each item got a few seconds of screen time. The camera then focused on a single area before the man spoke. I recall he spoke in a very timid, quiet voice, and I swear I've heard it somewhere else before, like on another Caledon Local 21 show. I could barely hear what he was saying, but he mainly talked about how humans are garbage, or something that had to do with saving ourselves by cleaning up the garbage, which was us. It actually sounded really stupid, but still a feeling of dread came over me. I mean, that forest was possibly where those bodies were found, right? Mr. Bear's Cellar, episode 25. When the police administrator brought this tape in, I actually said, "Oh shit," and chuckled a bit out loud. Of course, I got stares from the staff, but Wilson explained to them about my little experience with Mr. Bear and how I still kept the letter he sent me. Like the previous episodes, this one included a guy wearing a bear mascot costume. The episode began with Mr. Bear waddling over to his cellar door with a bottle of orange juice in his paws. On the ground were 16 shot glasses, as well as a small bottle that contained an unknown liquid. Mr. Bear poured an equal amount of orange juice into each glass before opening the smaller bottle and depositing one drop into the glasses. Mr. Bear then went off camera. There were some minor sounds such as shuffling, and then Mr. Bear emerged from behind the camera's location. Following him were 16 children. Some looked as young as 4, while others looked like they were practically teenagers. As the children entered, the administrator commented that this is the only episode that showed all 16 victims. The kids all looked rather content, except for this one who had visible bruises on his face, and unlike the other kids, he had a more fearful expression. He looked about 11 or 12, which caused me to recognize him. He was the kid who had asked about his sister and subsequently met an unknown fate at the end of episode 23, the one episode I watched during July 1999. When I told the administrator this, he confirmed it was the same kid. He was also featured in episode 24, an episode that only aired once at 3 o'clock in July 1999. The police have still not found the tape. Mr. Bear then broke into a song, singing about citrus fruits and about how good vitamin C was for you. I could barely hear the lyrics as they were muffled by the bear mask. All the kids drink their juice, the one from episode 23 doing it rather reluctantly, and the episode ended. After viewing the tapes in possession of the Davis Road police station, I'm satisfied, but only temporarily. I still want to know the full story. The police just keep giving me the same crap about the creator of Caledon Local 21 being a fetishist pedophile as well as an apparent cultist. I will sign off for now, get into university first, and get information later. Hopefully, I will get back to this blog as soon as possible. Update, May 8th, 2010. Last month, I finally got my G2 license. In Ontario, Canada, this allows you to drive your car by yourself as well as with some passengers after 6 months. I, of course, took advantage of this and drove into Caledon for a little Sunday drive. Since I haven't updated this blog in a while, I figured I might as well visit the house where the infamous channel of my childhood was located. The house looked different than when I last saw it in October. The place was no longer used as a daycare, and it just sat there abandoned. However, it did have a for sale sign showing that someone still owned it, wanting to get rid of it though. The abandoned house drew fuzzy memories from my mind, mainly of that day my dad took me to visit Mr. Bear. A feeling of dread came upon me. What happened to the children while they were living in that house? I walked up the steps to the front door and peered through the window. Inside, I could see a nearly empty hallway with a few boxes at the end. At the end of the hallway to the right was an open doorway, presumably leading to the kitchen. To the left were 2 doors, both apparently leading to the rooms visible through the windows outside. I wondered where the cellar entrance was located and whether it had been sealed up. I walked around to the back of the house and found my answer. 2 wooden doors lying at an almost flat angle were padlocked shut. This had to lead to the cellar. Not wanting to go around, you cannot imagine what was going through my mind at this time. I departed. Behind the house, the empty field continued on until it reached a dense forest that lined the horizon. I wondered if that was the forest where the bodies of the children were found. I thought to myself, fuck it. I proceeded to walk across to the field behind the house into the forest. The forest was oddly quiet, except for the few periodic sounds of a woodpecker drilling into a distant tree. I cautiously made my way deeper into the woods, not really caring about the fact I had no idea where I was going. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like there was something I had to find. I came to a thinner part of the woods and a few small houses in the distance. Polo's house crossed my mind, and I wondered if one of these homes had belonged to him. I neared a small clearing in which I could see 3 adequately sized logs gathered around a black charred area, showing a small fire had been lit there recently. Hey, "Get the fuck out of our fort." Those words nearly gave me a heart attack. I turned to my left and saw two dark clothed people running towards me. My initial thought was to run. However, as they came closer, I saw they were really just kids in their early teens, possibly 13 or 14, maybe even 12. As they approached me, they realized my size as well. I'm 6'1", while they could have been no bigger than 5'8". One might have been 5'7". We said, "Get the fuck out." The larger one, who was wearing a Slipknot shirt, said half-heartedly. I stood my ground and shrugged. The shorter one, who was wearing a Metallica shirt, swung out a butterfly knife and held it in my direction. "No, you wouldn't want to," I said in a deep, serious tone, trying to sound as badass as possible. I pulled out my cell phone. The two kids withdrew, the one in the Metallica shirt putting away the knife. "Look, dude, we don't like people in our fort, so can you just go?" the one in the Slipknot shirt said, obviously intimidated. I had no business in the forest anyway, so I uttered out a simple "fine" and turned before I realized I had a great opportunity. "Did either of you hear of a guy who murdered a bunch of kids in these woods about 13 years ago?" I asked the kids. The two looked at each other in confusion before the one wearing the Metallica shirt answered. "Yeah, everyone knows about that guy," he said to me as if I were stupid. The kid in the Slipknot shirt continued. "He still lives around here, in the storm drain. My big brother's friend says he saw him in a bear costume once, wandering around the forest at night." My instincts told me this was probably a lie, and the owner of Caledon Local 21 is probably gone, only existing as folklore in this smaller, isolated community. However, as a human, the thought of the mysterious unknown sparks interest within. "And where is this storm drain?" I asked, just out of curiosity. I don't actually believe the kid's story. The kid in the Metallica shirt stared at me for a few moments, his eyes seemingly full of annoyance yet curiosity for me. "You're not from around here, are you? Why did you even come here?" Now, I do admit, I was slightly startled by the nature of his question. However, I figured I might as well explain why I was there, just in case people mistook my intentions. I told the two kids about my experience with the man and Caledon Local 21, and that I had come to maybe seek out some sort of closure, although even I wasn't exactly sure. The kids seemed familiar with the channel, as they smiled and looked at each other when I mentioned it. They also became more understanding and gave me a detailed description on how to get to the storm drain. Shortly after, I decided to turn around the way I came back and head back to the house, leaving the kids at their fort. But now you're probably wondering why I left out such detail about what the kids told me just now. It's because I'm choosing to conclude what I gathered now. Here's what the kids told me in detail. The storm drain lies ahead of the kids' fort in the same direction I was heading. The drain ends at a small river where access water is drained out. Near here is a small playground. The kids told me people rarely use it. The man supposedly lives in the large pipe that rainwater drains out of. People have seen him, although always either wearing a bear mask or the mask in a full-body bear costume. No, I do not believe this is true, and in fact simply a myth created by the residents of Caledon. The story does not seem plausible in any way. Why did no one call the police? Didn't this guy look suspicious? And other questions like these leave the story invalid. I may visit the storm drain, not because I believe the story, but because I want an excuse to visit Caledon again, so this blog doesn't die. With no more tapes to watch, I don't know what I could talk about anymore. Thanks for supporting me in my blog. I know many are looking forward to more information about what happened in Caledon during the year 1999, and I will do my best to continue my research into the topic. Elliot out. Update, October 7th, 2010. Wow, nearly 5 months since I last updated. I'm guessing everyone pretty much thinks I was dead, right? Thankfully, I'm not. But in all my seriousness, I seriously have been busy these past few months, and a blog about something that could have killed me as a kid is a little low on my current priorities list. As of now, I'm living in Waterloo, Ontario, attending the University of Waterloo for computer engineering. Yeah, I'm a keener. As you can imagine, engineering is no walk in the park. So obviously, I nearly forgot about this blog, but as you can see now, I'm back. I remember to visit the storm drain the kids from Caledon Forest told me about. It was out in a clearing between the wooded areas nearby a marsh. Unfortunately, I found absolutely nothing, except for a turtle that retreated into its built-in home when it saw me. I snapped some pics of the pipe, which I have posted as well. Also, let me tell you, it was not a storm drain like they said it was. What I saw was a simple pipe, possibly to channel excess water from the marsh. When I returned from Caledon, however, I simply kept putting off uploading everything until I forgot all about my blog. It just didn't seem that important anymore. Please forgive me. It wasn't until only recently that I am now interested in my case again. On September 10th, I received an email from this email address, returntheb@hotmail.com. Funny, am I right? Well, it gets better. I'm gonna copy and paste the exact email this guy sent me. Dear Elliot, my dear boy. You see, this story may or may not be true, but it could happen. There are many slots for airtime. If you have money, you can have a public access TV channel. Some public access channels share airtime, like EWTN, religious channel based out of Michigan, that shows Catholic-based programming, but during off-air hours have independent shows or just blue screen. Cable networks have empty channels available for rent space, so the scenario of a pedo renting a channel on basic TV is not far-fetched at all. However, public access TV is widely reviewed and can be terminated at any time. These are the rules for the United States, not for Canada, where the story took place. So if this happened in the US, the pedo would be tracked and arrested immediately. Yes, this story could happen, but it's unlikely. 100 fuzzy hugs, Mr. Bear. Now, obviously, this letter is fake and sounds almost corrupted, but still, I would like to thank whoever sent it, though they could use some English lessons. ones. Just reading this letter creeped me out, but because of it, I am now full of this new interest to continue my blog. I guess it's just funny trying to pursue the mysteries I've always questioned. Now my roommate knows about all of this. He thought the letter was real and actually seemed more scared than I was for a second, but then I shrugged it off, so he did too. I mean, what are the chances of this being real? How would Mr. Bear know all this about public access TV and about when I went to Caledon on those occasions? More or less know my email or me still being interested in his cellar. I'm gonna send a reply to return the bee, but wow, just looking at the email address, you can tell someone wanted to freak me out. It didn't really work though. Although, to whomever you are, thank you for sparking my interest back into the full matter. Maybe I can find out more about what happened to Mr. Bear. Hopefully, because although I don't buy that email, part of me still feels anxious. Thank you to all those who are still following me and have become avid fans. You are also why I am choosing to continue this. Thanks guys. Update, November 7th, 2010. Wow. I can't believe this blog hasn't been deleted yet. I haven't posted anything for so long. I have my reasons, and I'd rather not discuss them just yet. It has been a rather traumatic year for me. I shouldn't have gone back trying to relive the mysteries of my childhood, but I couldn't resist. It has been over a year since my last post, and a lot has happened. Let's recap where I'm at right now with regards to the whole Mr. Bear incident. returnthebee@hotmail.com is no longer in use. I tried replying to the email, but I got no reply. I tried again a while back, still no response. I've actually moved up to Ottawa, capital of Canada for those who don't know, for university, so I haven't been back to Caledon or back home in the Peel region for a while. I had my reasons for leaving, as you could guess why. I had to make a new email account because people keep prank emailing me pretending to be Mr. Bear. Thanks a lot guys. Not. Why have I ventured back to this blog? Mitchell Wilson, remember my dad's ex-cop friend, gave me a phone call on October 23rd about a tape that was found in a branch of the Brampton Public Library. Brampton is my hometown, in case you haven't picked up on that. He claims he isn't allowed to discuss the contents of the tape with me as it's still evidence, but he asked me to come check it out when I return home. That tape got the gears grinding again because we all know what was on the last tapes I saw. I can only imagine what could be on it. I'm guessing it must have something to do with Caledon Local 21. I guess I just wanted to say I'm continuing this blog, and thank you for everyone who still follows it. I don't know when my next entry will be, but when I see that tape, I'll write what I find. I don't know what to expect, but the idea of seeing another tape has gotten me interested in this whole mystery all over again. Elliot. Update, January 21st, 2011. It has been a long year for me. University has been giving me the usual sleepless nights, especially since I transferred to Ottawa, which is the place to party. Sarcasm. But now I'm back home with my dad in Brampton, the town I grew up in. I got home on the 18th of December and would have been visiting with friends and family, or at least that's what I would rather have done. Now that festive holiday cheer that I usually have at this time of the month is absent. To answer the hundreds of emails and comments I got, yes, I did see the tapes that my dad's friend, Mitchell Wilson, promised to show me. These tapes, however, act as a curse. I want to know more, yet I want to forget everything. I couldn't help it. I needed to see those tapes. Not only for myself, but for all you guys who are just as intrigued as I am by that ominous man in a bear suit from my past. However, after viewing those tapes, I feel that pit of dread deep inside me once again. That feeling where I know that all those kids in those videos are dead. That I could have been one of those kids. And that humanity is a dark, dark place. If you haven't skipped this paragraph for the juicier details below, thank you for listening to my rambling. On January 1st, I called Mitchell Wilson and asked if there was a time where I could come by and view the tapes. Things were pretty slow at the station because of a snowstorm, so he said I could come down anytime that day. The tapes were located at a branch not too far from me, so I braved the slushy roads and terrible Brampton drivers and made my way to the Peel Regional Police Station located at the Vermilion City Center. I met Wilson at the front desk, where he then led me to the second floor and into a small office. He instructed me to have a seat and wait while he went and got the tapes. Before leaving the office, he turned to me and said, "I know you're curious, but are you sure you want to do this?" Of course I did, or at least thought so. Besides, Wilson's friends had pulled a lot of strings to get me in there, and I didn't want to waste the opportunity. This particular station had 2 tapes on hand. I was only able to watch a few minutes of footage, however, because the second tape was apparently too damaged to be played on a VCR. Mr. Bear's Cellar, episode 30. Mr. Bear never ceases to disturb me, especially after what almost happened when I was younger. This episode took place outside in a forest at dusk, making it slightly hard to see, especially considering the quality of the film, a trademark of anything from Caledon Local 21. The episode started with the camera being held in the paws of Mr. Bear aiming it at himself. That bear mask, it looked more sinister in the shadows of the trees. The unmistakable muffled voice spoke up. "Hello children, today I will be doing a wonderful thing for my friends. I will be delivering them to a faraway land where they will surely be happy." Mr. Bear turned the camera around to show an ATV with an attached trailer, but what stood out the most was that the trailer contained 7 motionless children lying side by side. This here is the first load, but there will be more on their way soon. Mr. Bear turned around and pointed the camera at a large burlap tarp spread on the ground. He picked the tarp up, revealing the large hole that must have been at least 12 feet deep. It and maybe about 15 feet wide. The rest of the episode consisted of Mr. Bear taking each kid and dropping them into the hole. I asked Wilson if they were dead, to which he shook his head and replied, not yet. Soon, all the kids were in the pit. Some were in awkward positions due to being tossed in, but they remained unconscious. The vitamin C will surely help these children on the great journey that awaits them. Mr. Bear mentioned that as he panned the camera towards multiple bottles of gasoline beside a bush. The camera zoomed into the bottles as Mr. Bear hummed before the episode ended. Wilson revealed to me that these were 7 of the 16 victims found burnt to a crisp. The gasoline is what the man playing Mr. Bear used to light them on fire. A pit full of burning children. Who the fuck would do that? That feeling of dread found me once again once I realized that I could have been one of those kids. Wilson then explained to me that he had previously lied. The other tape confiscated by the Bertie Ruiz police branch did indeed work and contained the filming of the actual burning. However, he felt I wouldn't be able to handle the disturbing and graphic nature of this episode. And you know what? Maybe I can't. I don't even want to see it. I'm satisfied for now, but I just need some time to get myself together. The thing is, the man who ran Caledon Local 21 is still out there. More to come soon. Elliot. Update April 5th, 2011. I wanted to update more. I truly did. However, certain circumstances had turned me off the whole Caledon Local 21 thing. I've since then had hundreds of emails about my blog and was even in contact with a magazine about my story. But now is the time to come clean to everyone. Where have I been for an entire year? The story of Pandora's box is true, and I opened it. I opened it when I watched the second tape in the possession of the Bertie Ruiz police branch. The other subject I'd like to address is the number of joke and fake emails I've been getting from people claiming to be Mr. Bear. Let's start with the second tape, as it is what traumatized me into stopping my search temporarily. After a few weeks of playing silent, I decided to ask Mitchell Wilson if I could view that infamous second tape he had talked about. I don't know why. I just feel that viewing that tape would give me some closure. Wilson was obviously reluctant to show me, but I was persistent. He gave me an offer. If I was still interested by the time I turned 20, he would show me the tape. Not being able to do much else, I just played the waiting game. By the time my 20th birthday rolled around, I was definitely still interested in viewing the tape. I gave Wilson a call, during which he admitted that he had hoped that I would forget about asking him again, but I wasn't taking no for an answer. You really don't need to see it, he kept telling me, but I did need to see it. I had to at this point. Sure enough, he invited me to the Bertie Ruiz branch one Monday afternoon. Having watched every Saw film and a video of animal slaughterhouses in my ethics class, I was sure I would be able to handle whatever the tape could throw at me. How naive I was. Mr. Bear's cellar, episode 31. When Wilson went to collect the tape from evidence, the officer in charge of the evidence room shook his head at me, his face saying, "What are you doing?" Wilson explained that this tape includes the last known episode of Mr. Bear's cellar. I rightfully assumed that I would be seeing the fate of the children and began to feel a sense of dread. The episode opened inside a forest, the usual one from the previous episodes. This fact took me a while to realize because it was night. The trees and leaves just looked like shapes dancing around in the darkness. A faint glow of light was present on the right side of the screen. There wasn't any apparent audio. It appeared to be a windy night, yet the trees weren't making any noise. Slowly, the camera began to pan towards the glow, revealing smoke rising from a hole with the tips of flames peeking over the top. Wilson paused at this point. "Are you sure you want to see this?" he asked me. I insisted on it, even though a voice in my head was telling me not to. The video continued. The cameraman moved towards the hole, showing a pit of fire. This was the hole that I had seen in the previous episode, only this time it was filled with shapes. I could see shapes moving around, fluttering, flailing, some motionless, and knew perfectly well what they were. The camera began to adjust the lights and burning flesh. Red, black, a blur of several movements and colors. I wish I could forget what I saw, but you can't forget a scene like this. This was not a horror movie, it was reality. Human beings were being killed in a horrifying way, a fate that I could have potentially met. The video suddenly cut to dawn. The camera now positioned farther away from the hole. The fire was out. However, there was still smoke rising up. A figure was up ahead. I recognized it right away. The Mr. Bear suit was laid out on the ground, empty. It looked just as unnerving. The suit was laid out in the shape of a cross. The cameraman did a lap around the suit, treating it like a treasured artifact. Placed at the head of the suit was a sign in bold red letters. INRI was printed. The cameraman moved back to the end of the suit, zooming into the bear's face. The episode finally ended. I was speechless. It was like a dream. You can find a lot of terrible things on the internet, but I had never seen anything like this. Wilson asked if I was okay, and I replied with a shaky yes. I assured him as we left that I was fine and that the video gave me some closure over the whole incident. He didn't seem too confident in me, but he left it at that. He was right though. I had nightmares for weeks. I gave up. I didn't care about this whole thing anymore. A sick man burned a bunch of kids alive, attracting them with a fake kids TV channel. I could have been one of his victims, yet I'm still here. I suppose I should be grateful, but I feel guilty. Am I still here only by pure luck? 10 months later, I'm back. But now I need to address something else. My email has been flooded with messages. Some people asking for more details, some ask if I can upload the tapes, and some people email me claiming to be Mr. Bear. First, I cannot get the tapes uploaded as they're A, in police possession as evidence, and B, I have no idea how to transfer VHS onto a computer. As for people pretending to be Mr. Bear, you're not fooling me. When you have dozens of people pretending to be the same person, it doesn't work. I've even seen a fake Caledon Local 21 YouTube channel, which is cute, but still not real. Even more annoying is the fact that someone hacked my account just to put up some demented poem about me on this blog. I'll leave it in the entry above this one just to show you guys. I have contacted my webmaster about the entry and was told that it was posted on Halloween. Oh, spooky. Attached to the email, paintwithb@aol.com, which I assume is another joke email. I'm over episode 31 now. The images of what I saw will stick with me for a while, but I want to do one last hurrah. I will get into contact with Mitchell Wilson again and hopefully get set up with the tapes in the possession of the other Peel Police branches. I'll try to update you guys as soon as I can. I'm sure this won't take so long again. Thank you to everyone who still reads this. Elliot. While 1999 is a full story rather than an individual character, the main antagonist in the story, Mr. Bear, is the image most commonly associated with the story. In most depictions, the very small scale of the show is reflected in the fact that he is shown to be wearing a very low-budget moth-eaten bear suit. In some versions, eyes are missing or the mouth is unusually distorted, for example, appearing more circular than an actual mouth and being full of more human-looking or broken teeth. Origin and development. 1999 differs from the majority of popular creepypastas in that it makes no claim to have a supernatural or monstrous element, other than the human monster in the form of a disguised child murderer. Where it does share traits with other creepypastas is in its concept. 1999 is an example of recognized subgenre within creepypasta known as lost episode narratives. This particular form of creepypasta story is usually concerned with missing, hidden, or sometimes secret episodes of popular television shows, most often kids shows, that have some sinister, disturbing, or altogether less wholesome tinge to them. This subgenre also covers the tales of shows that only a few witnesses claim to have seen, or which many can partially recollect, but which are not officially recorded. In many of these stories, such as 1999, the shows in question are said to have had very small viewerships and are often public access television shows. This plot device is intended to make it more plausible that the show has only been seen or will only be recollected by a small number of people. An initial draft of 1999 was posted by its author Camden Lamont on November 14th of 2009. The story, which was posted to its Slack LaLanne blog, would be revised and improved from this point on until April of 2011. The story was posted to 4chan's X Paranormal board on September 9th of 2012. Interestingly, the anonymous poster submitted the story while stating that he wanted to look back on the story and suggested that he was posting it to inquire as to whether there was ever any follow-up or resolution after the cliffhanger ending. The manner in which this post was made is unusual. The allusions the poster makes to the story would not only seem to suggest that the poster expected the community to already be familiar with the story, as if it was already widespread, but that they would be familiar enough with the tale to know that it ended on a cliffhanger and even potentially be aware of some continuations of the story. Most of the conversation about the story after this point centered around the what happened next scenarios, and readers did head back to the original Slack LaLanne blog looking for answers, though some might suggest that this would be a clever way for Lamont to drive attention to his story if he were the one to post it on 4chan, suggesting that the story is already well known and starting a discussion about it to drum up interest, especially if a sequel or continuation was planned. No official resolution has ever come from Lamont, and the story remains a cliffhanger, which would seem to indicate that it was not him who posted it on 4chan. In fact, the story gained far more attraction and popularity in 2014 after it was read aloud on YouTube by such popular channels as CreepyPasta and Some Ordinary Gamers. Some channels have even uploaded supposed episodes of the fictional series from Caledon Local 21, complete with distortion and tracking lines intended to indicate that the video had been taken from an old VHS, despite the aspect ratio giving the piece away as a far more modern creation. That same year, the story appeared on creepypasta websites. The fan-made wiki for the 1999 creepypasta features detailed breakdowns and overviews of each episode of this fictional television show, and displays images supposedly of Mr. Bear, though there are many variants and little consistency in the appearance. In another turn of events, the fictional television show went on to feature in an actual television show when 1999 was adapted in 2017 for a show on Amazon. The adaptation, which remains faithful to the source material, was produced in collaboration with Lamont, and he is listed as the executive producer. 1999, the longest story on this list. This one was probably one of the best. I think it's second place behind the Russian sleep experiment, but this was a full-on story. I really appreciated that. I really liked that I don't know how to say this without sounding like a horrible person, but I'll say it. I really liked that the antagonist of the story, Mr. Bear, this is gonna sound horrible, burned the children instead of doing something I don't want to say to them. I just feel like that would have been another cop-out situation where it's like, oh, he's an EDP. Like it's just like he's doing a ritual, Of course, I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying I expected it to go the EDP route, but it surprised me. But yeah, let's head on to the next one. Teddy, written by Raidenist. My sister had a teddy bear, a scary teddy bear. I don't know why, but it creeped me out. It was just so disturbing to me. The thing had eyes that looked so real. It was as if it was made from a real bear, and its face was just blank and unsettling. I first started to get weird feelings about the bear when my sister first got it. She was only a baby at the time, and I was about 4. We had a dog, you see, and he had a habit of eating things, so my mother always had to put it up on the small cabinet in the corner of the hallway upstairs. Every time I went up those stairs, I saw that creepy bear suddenly glare around the corner at me, as if it was watching me. This wasn't the weird part. It started to get really weird about 5 years later, at the age of 6 or 7. My sister had lost interest in the bear, so my mother just threw it in the old toy cupboard. The only problem was that the cupboard was in my room. When I was 9, old enough to stay on my own and go to bed without any assistance, I'd get into my bed every night and turn my lamp off. This is when it got scary. As I was getting some sleep, I suddenly remembered my mom putting that teddy in the cupboard. I slowly turned to look across my room to see it through the glass. My heart suddenly stopped as I thought about the horrors the plush had caused me, but at the age of 9, I wanted to grow up and lose my fears, so I just shook it off and put my head on the pillow. When I got up to pull my sheets on a bit further, I noticed something that would scar me for life. There sat, at the end of my bedroom, the teddy. My heart started beating normally again. I sat there staring at it for about a minute. When I needed to yawn, I closed my eyes. I opened them to see the teddy sitting closer to my bed. At this point, I was really freaked out. I started to move back to the wall and looked around to see if there was any sign that anyone had come in. When I looked back to see the teddy on the end of my bed, I was so startled that I almost fainted from fear. When I blinked, it had gone. I looked around. To my relief, I saw no sign of it. I sat my head back down on my pillow, hoping for some sleep. Then, I opened my eyes. It was above my head, staring straight down. I screamed as it lunged down at me. I will never see a bear the same way again. A few years later, after years of horror, I burned it. I sat in enjoyment as the bear was turned to smoking ashes in my fireplace. I have lived my teenage life through adolescence. The only thing I could remember that was in any way similar to my bad experience was when I watched Trainspotting. That fucking baby scene shocked me so badly, but other than that, all was well. When I turned 19, I was about to move into my new home. I had been given the keys to the house and was ready to set up my furniture. After hours of carrying, I carried the final box from the removal truck into the front door and shut the door behind me. I turned to go into the kitchen and put it on the table. I opened it to see a cabinet. I took it out, walked into the living room, and placed it in the corner. I stared at it and thought to myself, I don't remember packing this cabinet. I didn't really care that much as I had just moved into my new home. I walked back into the kitchen to grab my television and brought it into the living room when I saw it. The teddy. It just sat there, staring at me. Teddy. This is probably the worst one from this video. Some people recommended this one. I don't know. The image is cool. It's pretty creepy, but it has no value. What was that ending? It was so weird. I didn't like that one. If I were to do a rating system, this would be a 0 out of 10. Matter of fact, negative a million out of 10. That was bad. That was so bad. Let's head on to the next one. Mario. No, this was a true story and sums up what was going through my mind as I was playing this, and I had no idea I was about to be bullshitted the way I was, and I played this, and I can say it is by far the creepiest hack I've played. If you were on IRC, you would have heard me talking about it as well, but anyways, it's late at night, and I don't have a lot of time, and I need to get to sleep, so this is all I have time for. So it all happened on tonight of all nights. I was bored, obviously contemplating what I thought I could do to waste time as I chatted with people in SMWC. We had good times, and shared a few laughs together. Out of boredom, I decided to patrol the hacks waiting to be moderated section. Seems that we had quite a bit, 33 if I recall correctly. The first few hacks I saw when I sorted them by date were a couple of really horrible ones with bad screenshots to boot. Naturally showed these hacks to the Centralites currently on SMWC. We were laughing about how bad some of them were. But then I got a hack called Mario. Just that. Nothing more, nothing less. The description seemed quite odd, as if some Japanese hacker was trying to translate the original plot of Super Mario World into English and failing horribly. I showed this to Kieran and he started laughing at the description. It read as follows. As you play the role of Super Mario Plumber, verify that you are beautiful Princess Purin Button Mash. Again, Bowser kidnapped the evil king. It is your job to save her. This hack includes 6 levels of very long. I simply dismissed this as someone trying to act Japanese and a really crappy hack with some edits or so. That's what I was thinking it was at first. Curiosity got the best of me. I decided to download the hack, not knowing what I was in for, since the single screenshot of the hack was the title screen with nothing but the letters Mario from Super Mario World's title screen. I thought it was a little odd how there were no dates or anything either, as hackers usually place their names and dates on the titles to mark when the project was started. So when I opened opened the hack, I was greeted by two files, one called 3007014, a simple .txt file, 27 kilobytes in size, and the IPS file, simply named Mario. For some odd reason, I wanted to see what the author of the hack had to say. When I opened the hack in Notepad, there was nothing but indistinguishable symbols and letters and punctuation. Sort of like how when you open a ROM in a text editor like Notepad, seems like the author just completely copied his ROM to TXT form, though I could be wrong. Taking a closer look at the top of the TXT file mixed in with the gibberish I found, the only thing that looked like English there was this: Y0YAJFIFHHYB, find me, find me, find me, find me, find me. To be honest, I don't know what to make of this, and I thought it was simply to waste some of my time by making me find some text in the gibberish file that I'm willing to bet no one will ever be able to make sense of. I decided that because my interest was growing steadily, I would start looking through my horribly disorganized download folder for a copy of a clean ROM, which I had downloaded a great deal of time before the events of tonight unfolded, in an IPS patcher. Of course, my choice for the job was a Lunar IPS, so I then proceeded to move the ROM and the IPS patcher to the folder with the hack, patch the ROM, not knowing what to expect next, and I quickly hurried to drag it to ZSNES and play what I thought was to be terrible in the form of a ROM image. I noticed on boot up that the author had taken the time to change the header of his hack. Instead of the usual Super Mario World you would normally see when booting up a ROM in ZSNES, it just had the letters Mario there again. At this point, I gained a little hope, because normally people who do horrible half-assed edits to the ROM generally don't know enough to change a header title. I thought I wasn't wasting my time with this, and my mood brightened slightly at the thought of seeing what the author had to offer in his interesting little hack. So the title screen loaded, exactly like it would with Super Mario World, except it just had Mario on the title, like I'd mentioned earlier. Something else had grabbed my interest more so than the unusual absence of layer 3 tiles on the title screen. Mario's normal bright colored and happy palette seemed, how can I put it, dull. What was once violet like red was now what seemed like gray with a slight red tint to it, and I'm fairly sure his pants were looking more gray than blue too. I thought this was strange, and I wondered why he had decided to give Mario such a dull palette. Regardless as to what his intentions were, I felt that something was wrong. Not in the sense that the palette was slightly bad, but that the hack was empty, like something had happened. Upon pressing start and selecting a new file, like a lot of the other countless Mario hacks I've played in the past, there was some sort of intro screen that basically described the entirety of the plot in a short paragraph, just small enough to fit into a small black box. I began reading, and for the most part, the message stayed the same. But there was one key factor that made this interesting. Apparently the main antagonist of this hack wasn't Bowser, but it was Mario. The message read as follows: "Welcome, this is Dinosaur Land. In this strange land, we find that Princess Toadstool is missing again. Looks like Mario is at it again." What the? This wasn't the original message from Super Mario World, I thought to myself. Normally I wouldn't think anything of this, seeing as how over my nearly 2 years at SMW Central, I have played countless hacks and have seen many different intro messages, but this one just really stuck out. At this point, I definitely knew there was something odd about this hack. Upon letting the intro level music play, I pressed the start button on my controller to finally get to the overworld and begin my journey into this unknown hack. Upon entering the overworld, everything seemed normal. Same old level paths, same old music, but the level names were different. Instead of Yoshi's house, like it's always been, it was now simply just Yoshi's. The house part was gone. I thought that this was strange, and I began to lose hope in the hack because it seemed like barely anything had changed at all from the original. I was hoping to see something new. Well, unluckily for me, I got my wish, as you'll see when you read on. I decided to enter the level out of curiosity. When I entered, the whole house that's normally there was gone. No more smoke, no more fire, no more little birdies, no more treehouse. All that was left was the message box. I decided to hit it. Upon opening, the message I expected to be there was replaced with what seemed like binary. Apparently it says Notepad. At this point, I was on IRC telling everyone how the hack was starting to weird me out, which in itself fueled some sarcastic responses, but hey, I expected it. Anyway, after this, my interest level in the hack skyrocketed, and along with it, my paranoia. Oh boy, I was in for a fun surprise. So I decided to head left. Upon reaching what was before known as Yoshi's Island 1, the level was now labeled Never Come Back. Now, I thought things were gonna be all Kaizo Death Trap, because generally, that's what people name their levels in Kaizo hacks, to make sure the player doesn't go there. To my surprise, it wasn't quite that way, though I wish it had been. Upon entering level 105, I was greeted by the insanely loud clown car that Bowser's flying vehicle makes right before Peach falls out. Of course, with my headphones being moderately high, the sound scared the living shit out of me, which wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been so nervous beforehand. I decided at this time, it would be best if I turned the volume on my headphones down, as not to get any more unpleasant surprises such as that one. When I entered the level, other than the music, everything seemed to be the same, except for the fact that the little Koopa that slides on the ledges wasn't there anymore, nor was the bonsai bill. The dragon coin was still there. However, for some odd reason, I wasn't able to collect it, or rather any dragon coins at all. The author made certain of that. I also noticed that there was a brown used block near the spot where the bonsai bill normally shows up. I can only assume this was a revisit to the level after I had beaten it, like I had heard in some half-assed creepy stories in other Mario games. Now I was wondering why things were like this, making me wonder about the intro message. Had Mario done something previously to Dinosaur Land? Was this in Bowser's point of view? I quickly dismissed the latter option, because it seemed kind of stupid. So that left me thinking that Mario at one point in time time in the author's story did something. But what? What did Mario do? My mind was nothing but rushing thoughts at this point. However, I quickly dismissed them and ventured further into the level, only to find that all the blocks had basically been hit. Coins had been collected, except dragon coins. Those were all still there and unattainable. There were no enemies, and I could no longer go down pipes. What kind of bullshit was I playing here? I kept thinking to myself. At this point, I felt uncomfortable, but I decided to keep venturing. Eventually, I came across a message box, which I wasn't surprised was still in the level. Being the idiot I am, I went and hit the box. Upon hitting it, I was greeted with the familiar black box once again. The message was edited, obviously, as I had figured that was a given at this point. It read as follows: point of advice, I hate you. Now, I thought things were starting to get the vibe that the author was a twisted and warped individual, and that I was right about Mario having done something. At this point, I was basically rushing to get to the end of the level, so I just scurried by, and then I came across another message box. However, this one was just a blank box with point of advice at the top with nothing else in it. I quickly disregarded it and headed off further to the right, hoping to free myself of all hell that was once level 105. Upon reaching the end, I saw a fire flower in the top block where the 4-way block intersection used to be. However, it was too high for me to reach by normal means, so I just continued onward, like the blind, curious idiot I am would do. So I finally beat the level, and as usual, the path to the Yellow Switch Palace was unlocked. I decided to head up the path that normally leads to the Yellow Switch Palace, and I found that when I entered the main overworld, every other landmass and decoration besides the ghosts were gone. Nothing really changed at the Yellow Switch Palace except for the switch message. All that changed was that Switch Palace was changed to Mario World. Boring. Anyway, just when I thought I was done with this abomination that calls itself a hack, I found that Yoshi's Island 2 has also been edited. Oh joy, I thought to myself. Sarcasm. Upon reaching Yoshi's Island 2, I found that it had been renamed to Yoshi's House, the original name of level 104. I decided to enter and found that the palette of the level had been changed along with the background. They seem to have been changed to the same palette as Yoshi's Island 3, you know, greenish tan and such, except the background was pushed down some and was now a rotting brown color, and that the vegetation on the FG was now no longer present. I decided to explore the level a bit and came across the trails of Koopas that countless players have used the shell to rack free 1-ups with. I decided to ignore them and see if any more of the level was changed. I eventually came across the question mark that holds Yoshi and decided to free him. Upon freeing him, I got this message: hooray! Thank you for rescuing me. My name is Yoshi. On my way to rescue my friends, Mario trapped me in that egg. This had me wondering what kind of sick and twisted hack I was playing. I had thoughts of all possible scenarios of Mario attacking Dinosaur Land horribly and causing irreversible damage. The author had me hooked with his sick little game, and like any other idiot, I took the bait and kept coming back for more. Somewhere not far off from the Yoshi question mark block, I found a message box in the same place I remember that it had always been. Though if I've learned anything from playing this, it's that whatever had to be in that message box was not going to be remotely normal in the slightest. This made me hesitate to hit it, but I ended up doing so anyways. I wanted to find out more. The message I was greeted with was as follows: but is there anything I can do to change your mind? What the fuck? I thought to myself, what the hell did this even mean? Change my mind? What would I change my mind about anyway? Was this about Mario and whatever he did, and about how people were trying to convince him to stop? Was Yoshi talking to me through the message boxes? Or was it about me? About me playing the hack? As if the hack was trying to talk me through the message boxes? Either way, whether it was for more backstory on what Mario had done, or if it was questioning my decision to keep going, I decided to keep progressing despite the obvious signs that I should have quit playing the hack a while ago. As I progressed further, I found that I was right. All vegetation was now gone, and nothing was left at all, except a few enemies, like chucks and moles and such. Even the pipes were gone. I came across another message box. Like all other times before, I decided to hit it. I was greeted with yet another cryptic message: point of advice. This is the selfish way out. The selfish way out? What the hell? Was he calling me selfish for continuing to play the hack despite the warnings? Had Mario made some kind of selfish decision that only benefited him? Was Yoshi still trying to talk to me? What the hell was this guy trying to tell me? At this point, I was creeped out to the point that I was shaking slightly. A mix of anticipation, fear, and the fact that my room was terribly cold last night. I closed the message box and once again proceeded further. The area with the moles seemed the same, except for the fact that the block next to the vine block was gone, along with the happy clouds, the dragon coin the vine was allowed access to. This made me feel gloomy, to say the least. Not so much frightened as I was depressed. It's a feeling I couldn't really explain well. From this point on, it was basically just a big empty stretch of land to the end of the level. I proceeded quickly. Wanted to get the fuck out of there, as I felt that I had spent enough time looking around. So, me and Yoshi, I still had him at the time, opened up the next path on the overworld. It too was changed. What was once Yoshi's Island 3 now read as Yoshi's Island 7. Memories of Super Bobido World flooded my mind. How the levels would take giant leaps in number order, which made it seem ridiculous. Though at this time, I didn't find find it quite humorous. Due to common sense and obvious reasons explained earlier, I entered the level. As I entered, I was welcomed by a solid black background and a blue and gray colored floor. The place seemed frozen, lifeless and barren. There was nothing in the level at all, except the goal point, just a clear stretch of land with nothing else at all. I quickly lost interest and finished the level. This was what seemed like the most empty and creepy level in the game, though as you'll read on, it gets far worse. With the level beaten, a new path opened up. Yoshi's Island 4 was just now, leave now. Now I hesitated as to whether I would stop playing, but my interest kept me going further. At this point, SMWC was nothing but me posting findings and messages from the hack, just so others could experience what I was experiencing. The channel sadly was unusually inactive. Seemed like no one really cared or wasn't around. I felt alone. I proceeded into the level. For the most part, everything seemed the same, except for the fact that there was now no water at all to keep me from falling in pits without using Yoshi as a sacrifice. The level was also void of all enemies as well. Whenever I got to an area that seemed too far for me to jump, I found that I could just walk right across on the air, thus getting rid of the need to use Yoshi as a sacrifice. It's apparent that the hack wanted me to keep him. I was able to get to the pipe that usually leads to the exit level. I went in and found that the room was exactly the same. Everything in the right place and nothing edited, or so I thought. The message box once again broke the mood of that brief moment of relief I had gained upon entering the pipe. At this point, I was questioning whether I should keep going to see how it ends, or quit while I still have a bit of common sense left. The message box was sort of indistinguishable, and I couldn't really make sense of it. For a moment, I tried to figure out what the box meant, but eventually I just gave up and beat the level. You get if you cut the at the end, if you collect you can. I figured the box wasn't worth the time anyways. With the level beaten, the path to the first world castle opened, now renamed from number 1 Iggy's castle to number 1 Go Back. I sure did feel welcome here. Sarcasm. I decided to completely ignore the level name, as I just wanted to get this over with and be done with it forever. What seemed like a normal castle intro was made especially creepy, given the fact that I had to dismount Yoshi. I felt for the first time that I was actually abandoning him, and I wish I had taken him with me. The inside room of the castle looked strange. There was this darkish bluish greenish black lava on the ceiling, and there were goal points that looked like pillars. Aside from that, next to each pillar, there was an increasing amount of message boxes next to each pillar the further I got. The room was basically just a big hallway with no enemies or anything of the sort. Every message box I pressed either gave me a blank box with Yoshi's signature at the bottom, or the message that read as follows: "Don't you think you've caused enough trouble?" Another cryptic message. Though at this point, I wasn't surprised, not in the slightest. Again, the thoughts in my head started circling, wondering what exactly Mario had done, why he was here, and why everything seemed to hate everything about him and wanted him gone forever. I was feeling more depressed and scared at this point, to be honest, and I had no idea what to expect next. I proceeded down the hallway, checking message boxes filled with nothing but the same 2 messages over and over. It's like they were telling me to stop playing or something. Obviously, I ignored them and kept going. I eventually reached the end of the hallway. There was a door, which I entered. I was welcomed by nothing but a small section of land, and at that, the level was auto-scrolling, so I figured this must be the end, that the author wanted me to jump into the pit and commit suicide or something, thus ending my journey. I was wrong. The auto-scroll pushed me over the ledge, and I was still walking. Unfortunately, the whole level was nothing but a stretch of invisible land to another small piece of land, just big enough for a boss door to fit. The auto-scroll came to a stop, and I prepared for the worst. I gathered my composure, swallowed some spit in my mouth, and took a deep breath. I entered. Nothing but a normal Iggy boss. I felt cheated in a way though. I was happy to think it was finally over. I defeated Iggy with 2 jumps effortlessly, which was actually the quickest I had beaten him before. After he fell in the lava, the course clear message popped up as usual. It ended and I was brought to the rescue egg scene, though instead of the usual message, I was shown something disturbing and vastly different, like a profile for the scene of a crime. It was as follows: Victim number 1. Eyeballs were unable to be found. The victim was found lying on her carpet. Causes of death unknown. Hand marks with unidentifiable fingerprints were found all over the corpse. What the fuck is wrong with this guy? I said as I read the disturbing message. I mean, it was a hack, but still, who the hell was this victim? Why were her eyeballs gouged out? And just what could have made those unidentifiable fingerprints that were found on her body? Was this Mario's doing? Is this what the author was trying to tell me? And furthermore, was the girl Princess Toadstool? It took me a while to see if I read the message correctly. Then I proceeded outwards, though I was wondering what would happen next. Since the main map was completely gone, there was no trace of it anywhere. To my surprise, it still showed the path marked for donut plains, the event tile still being there, marking the path to the lone level on the giant map that was once the main world. It was still called Donut Plains 1. I thought we were finally done once more, but when I entered the level, I could see that like the previous times, I was once again wrong. Upon entering, I saw 2 message boxes. They said as follows: "There's no way out of here. Fly away." I found it quite strange that both message boxes were contradicting each other. One was telling me that there was no way out of this accursed hell, and the other was telling me that that if I could fly away, I could be free. Though I saw no feather or enemies to grab one with. Was this telling me that I could either rise up and go to heaven or stay in hell forever, wallowing in my despair? Did I need a cape to proceed? And what happens after this? Is the whole game like this? I began to create more thoughts in my head, trying to figure out the message boxes out, but to no avail. I proceeded to walk to the right. I made a jump, but I found that I was stuck in the area. There was an invisible wall, and I had thought I hit a dead end. When I landed, I tried moving right again to see if there was any way to go on. All of a sudden, I heard the pipe sound, and I was making the pipe animation, except there was no pipe present, so it looked quite odd. Then I was taken to a level with a black background, stone blocks for ground, and a small door. I was immediately given a mushroom to prevent me from entering it, so I proceed further to see if there's anything else in the level. I found that the room was nothing but a long stretch of concrete blocks and doors that were too small for me to enter because of the mushroom I got. It's obvious the author didn't want me going through any of them, or I wouldn't have gotten the mushroom in the first place. As I proceeded, I found myself at a dead end. Since there was nothing left for me to look at, I tried to go right again. It worked. I went through the brick wall, it acted like a pipe, and I did a pipe animation that looked like I was going into the darkness. I was then taken to a small room with what seemed like a pit and a wall. I jumped down the pit, seeing as there was no other option, though I found that the bottom of the pit was solid. I tried pressing down in a bunch of areas until I came across a pipe. Mario slowly did the pipe transition downwards off the screen. Expecting another level, I waited, but there was no more, just a black screen. I was unable to continue, unable to pause or exit the level or move. There was nothing at all. This was the video game representation of death, a crash. Mario had died. After playing, I think I finally understand what was happening. I believe Mario was atoning for his actions, eventually being plummeted into hell that looked exactly like Yoshi's Island, where he was lost to the grip of death forever. I was finally done playing and quite relieved at that. The nightmare was over. Activity on the IRC seemed to be back up again. I quickly shared my tales with the rest of SMWC and typed this documentation of it. If you feel daring enough, you too can witness my tale firsthand. Remember guys, it's only a hack. It can't hurt you. Or can it? So the Mario one is a pretty interesting creepypasta. One, because the internet recently found the OG image, which, in case you don't know, this is like the creepy one, and this is the recently found original image. It's still kind of creepy. Sorry, whoever's in that picture. It's a creepy picture. But you guys are gonna notice that a lot of these creepypastas are just straight up corny. That's why I didn't do a rating system last time. It's just a lot of them would be kind of they just fall flat on their face. But in terms of the Mario one, I like that we had a video game one again. Last one was Sonic.exe. I don't think we have a video game one besides this one. Yeah, no. Anytime it's about video games, it's pretty cool because you could just recreate it in a ROM, and I have background footage for it. Let's head on to the next one. The Smiling Man, written by Blue Title. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. Past the time, I used to go for long walks and spend my time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night. Never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite, but all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police patrolled park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was a silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and now was slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept towards me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough to almost be out of sight. And then, I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see a stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high, he looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. The Smiling Man. I never heard of this one. I had a handful of people tell me to put it in the video, but reading it, again, I'm not going to use the C word, but I am. Corny. Not much to say. Not really something that would make my hairs perk up before I go to sleep. It's kind of funny just thinking about a dancing man with a smile on his face. Alright guys, so that's the end of the video. First of all, make sure to leave a like. Second, I am looking forward to making a volume 3. I really like these. I don't know up until how many, I won't go past 5. I don't think so. I would want to end the last video, whatever number that is, with modern creepypastas that no one has heard of. I think that would be super cool. But if you guys have recommendations for volume 3, please let me know and I will put them in the video. Yes, Ben Drowned was supposed to be in this video, but then I realized it's just really long, so gonna put that in another video. This video is like over an hour and 40 minutes. It's almost 2 hours. I do want to give a space in this video to a slideshow of the recent fan art I've gotten with my new logo. I just want to thank you guys so much. If you don't like it, then fuck off. I mean, I'm not gonna change it. I don't know in what world I would see like commenter 386 and be like, oh my god, he's right, it's corny. Like, no. I finally feel like I have an identity that isn't my brand. Yeah, slideshow starts now. Wow, great slideshow, right? I haven't seen it yet, nor have I made it. Great slideshow, right? If you guys want to submit fan art, make sure to do it in my Discord or just tweet it at me. Discord is easier. It's just, there's a channel right there called fan art. It's discord.gg/tuv. Make sure to follow me on Instagram at my name is Tuv. And I'm so happy you guys are enjoying the new style of videos. I know they come out a little later than usual. I'm putting in more work. And I got an interview coming out on my second channel, an interview with Jake Weber. Some of you guys may know him. So make sure to go check that out when it comes out. Go to my second channel. I be uploading like non-morbid videos over there. So if you like me, if you like the content, make sure to go check it out. And one last thing, make sure to go watch my last video, the Shay St. John video. It's an underrated video on my channel, and that's okay. But I put a lot of effort into that one. That's it. I'll see you guys next time I upload.